So now we're going to mix the yellow. I've changed the water. We only need a couple brushfuls of water because we don't need very much yellow. Well, let's do 3. What the heck? Touch the towel to get the extra water off, and I'm going to try out this medium yellow. That looks like it's going to be a really good match, just looking at it on the tip of the tube. And we can always adjust it if it's not, but this might be the one color we just used straight out of the tube. I do want it pretty bright, so I'm going to use quite a bit with not very much water. And let's just see what that looks like on the test strip. Oh, that's not bright at all. It's quite pale, actually. So I'm going to add the rest of it. And then scrape and test. That's getting better, but I still need more. So I could squeeze it directly into the mixing pan, but if you squeeze it onto a dry spot on your palette, you have more control over how much you're actually putting in. So that's often the better choice. Although with this color, since it pretty much is going to be very, very bright and straight out of the tube, I could get away with either way. And I think that looks like a pretty good match. So now we've got all our colors, and I'm going to have you do a couple of tests because we're going to try this a couple different ways for 2 reasons. One, to see how it comes out a couple of different ways. So draw a couple of just test squares on your paper somewhere. And then the other reason is to just get a little bit of practice with the graduated wash that we're going to do in the sky. We're just going to practice the sky. It'll just help loosen us up a little bit and have a little bit more confidence when we approach the actual picture. So remember, these are just tests, so don't worry about how they end up looking. They're meant to be messed up on to some degree. So have your board propped up. I have it not flat on a table, but I'm using this this water tub thing. Oh shoot, to prop mine up on. You want it like a 30-degree angle or even less than that so that the water has an opportunity to fall. But don't rely on holding it up because you might need your other hand for something else. So I'm going to grab some of the first thing we're going to do is just wet the paper. And actually, sorry, for this we're going to use our really big brush. So you want to have 3 brushes for this painting, or at least 2. This one, just a really, really soft-haired brush for applying large areas of color, and then a round brush. If you have a round brush with a really pointy tip, you should only need these 2. If you have a round brush with not a pointy tip, you're also going to need a really, really pointy, fine detail brush. But that's optional if you have the little tip on your round brush. So anyway, we'll use those 2 later. Right now we're just going to use the big brush, load it full of water. That's I'm going to just tap it. Let's see. Move this so you can see the water. Tap it on the lip of the cup to get some of it off, and put a big brush stroke across the top, and then just wipe it all across the painting. Sky, just the sky. So try to get yourself in the light so that you can see where the water is, because sometimes watercolor paper will resist the water a little bit in some areas. And if that's the case, you definitely want to go over it to make sure every part of the sky is really wet. And you want the wetness to be as even as possible. So if some parts are really drippy and other parts are starting to dry, particularly on a, oh shoot, I'm not doing the, I'm doing the actual picture. Hang on, scratch that. That's just water, so it's not going to matter at all. It's just going to dry. I'm just going to leave that alone. I meant to do these 2. Anyway, sorry, we're going to do one at a time, just brushing the water in, and like I was saying, keeping it really even. I'm going to touch the towel and then go back and just soak up the drips. It's totally fine. In fact, I encourage you to break the bounds of the box, go outside a little bit. And then we're going to do wet into wet upside down, starting with, ignore the oranges and yellows. We're just going to go straight to the peachy color and drop that in and let it fall. I'm kind of forcing it to fall here. And see how that just bleeds down the page? and then touch your sponge or your towel and grab some of the blue and go about halfway down into the peachy part and just let that fall, but also just continue brushing the blue down, something like that, and encouraging it towards the bottom. So now we have kind of a 50-50 thing going on. I'm going to soak up that drip at the bottom edge. I don't want to have that line there, so to discourage it, I'm going to go back and use more water. If the peach were too light, I could go back and use more peach, but the peach is actually a little on the dark side, so I'm going to use water as my vehicle instead, and see how that just really breaks up the line. And you can just watch it, you know, kind of the life changing the entire time, because it's constantly changing as the water is moving down the page. Okay, so that's one way to do it, where we go from light to dark, or excuse me, from peach to blue. The other way we're going to try in this box is going from, also, we're going to go from peach to yellow to red, and then add the blue later. The reason we don't want to put the blue in at the top is because we don't want the blue to fall into the peach, the orange, and the yellow. Blue is a more dominant dark color, so it would easily do that if we allowed it to. So I'll show you what I'm talking about, or you just kind of follow along step by step. So we're going to wet this next box, just to test again, and use our round brush and start with the peach. So it's going to look the same at this point because we're starting at the top with the peach. But then when you're about halfway down, rinse, touch your sponge, or actually let's go a little further than that. I'm going to get more peach. Yeah. Just the only thing you need to watch is that the peach doesn't get anywhere near the center, because that's where you want the yellow to be, but it can easily fall all the way to the bottom. That's perfectly fine. Then I'm going to get the orange, and at this point I'm going to be ready to lift my board because I don't want the water to fall quite as quickly as it did with the peach. So I'm going to put the orange in, not going anywhere near the center. Touch the sponge or the towel. I have a lot of drip going on now, so I'm just going to soak some of that up so that it doesn't creep any further. And then we'll do the bright red all along the bottom edge, except in the center. I'm leaving, you can see, quite a wide area for that yellow, because I can always fill in with more red and orange. Rinse, touch, and now I'm going to go in with the yellow. I'm going to fill that in right in the middle, just let it bleed. Rinse, touch, and now I'm going to try to unify these colors a little bit by pulling the red with the tip of my brush. I need a little bit more, oops, that's not the red. I need a little bit more red, and I just stuck my hand in the other sample. Not the end of the world. Just have a handprint, see that? I left a handprint right there. Dab the red in next to the yellow, and I'm going to go back and just try to soften the top edge of the orange. So when you blend or soften something, if you don't want to leave a hard edge brush line, point towards the darker color. So I'm pointing towards the orange, and I'm just barely using the side of my brush to kind of wipe it, soften a little bit. And actually I really want that orange to kind of span across the sky, across the top of the yellow. So I'm going to encourage it to do that by wiping, barely touching the board. There we go. Now I still have some drips here, so I'm going to just soak those up, and we're going to blow dry. For blow drying, use a hair dryer and hold it, well, it depends on how much water you have. I still have a big drip of water right here, so I'm going to soak that up. The more you soak up your drips, the less you have to blow dry, so that's nice. Hold your blow dryer probably a minimum of 12 inches from your paper, but if you have any dripping at all or any kind of watery areas, if you hold your blow dryer really close, or even at 12 inches, sometimes the water will just kind of, it'll be forced out by the blow dryer. So you want to err on the side of caution. Aim your blow dryer away from your picture. When you turn it on low, and then gradually turn it towards the picture, and just hold it a good distance away so that you're comfortable and you can see that the water isn't moving. That being said, if you want the water to move, watch this. If I wanted that bottom edge to move, I could use the blow dryer to encourage it also. So you can use this to your advantage, but normally you don't want drips to move. is a drip I didn't see, otherwise I would have soaked it up with the brush. So see now, if I aim it this way, that drip is creeping in towards the sun and creating a hard edge there, but if I go this way, aha, it goes away. It's very nice. You can almost use the blow dryer as a blending tool. So to test to make sure it's dry, first of all, just look at it and see if you see any shiny parts. And if it looks okay, so I'm going to just test it. Always use the back of your hand because the front of your hand may leave fingerprints. The back of your hand or whatever will also leave a print, as evidenced by what I just did there. But at least it won't be a fingerprint, so it's less obvious. But obviously you just want to make sure it's dry before you even touch it by doing a visual. So now that I've got these two, I'm going to add the blue to this one and add the yellows and oranges to this one. So for that, where's my round brush? Here it is. Let's add the blue first. So we're going to do a wash of water over the whole thing. Oh, nuts. This is taped too far over. There we go. We're going to do a wash of water over the whole thing and then add the blue. Similar to what we did the first time, except we're only adding one color. The reason we're not just adding blue is because you'll have a very hard line where you just start the blue, so we want it to really blend into the landscape or the sky. So I'm going to add water, but add a lot of water and try to barely brush it on. And I'm using my round brush now because my large wide brush is good for applying kind of careless large areas of paint or water, but I want to be a little more ginger with this and try to use the brush to just touch the water, not the color. So my drips are so big, in other words, that I can kind of just guide it down by just dragging the top edge of the water down, not touching the color. And if you can achieve that, you won't put brush strokes into your already nice color. So now I'm going to add the blue. I just got a nice big brush full of blue, and I'm going to put it a little lower than I think I need to and just let it fall. And I did get a hard edge anyway, so my paper's still wet, so I can do this where I go back and add more water and let the water fall into the blue and kind of do what it wants. Take the blue down to the bottom of the page. Add a little bit more there. And then touch the sponge and touch that drip. So notice I'm wiping the drip, but that's only because I'm below the frame edge of my page. If you're ever on your paper and you need to touch a drip, only touch it. Even if you have to touch your towel and touch your drip 15 times, it takes a lot of patience, but you never want to wipe it because you'll usually end up wiping the color off. So that came out really nice. So that might be what the technique I end up using. All we're doing here is opposite, so it's whether we want to put the oranges and reds on first or the blue on first. For this one, we're going to do, oh, actually, we still wanted that upside down because we still want the water to fall into the oranges and yellows at the bottom of the sky. If we did it the other way, the oranges and yellows would fall up toward the blue, and we don't want that. So I'm going to start with just plain water. And try to use really big drips so that I don't end up pulling any color off or leaving brush strokes. And I'm lifting my board a little bit because I'm sensing that the drips are so big that they're probably going to roll down the page if I don't flatten it out a little bit. But it's more important to have big drips than to have a flat board. So now I'm going to soak up the drip, touch the towel, soak up the drip. If you want to cheat, you can just use the corner of your towel and do this. It's just a little bit more cumbersome. You can also tilt the board to one side so all the drip falls to one corner. It's a little easier to access that way. And then we'll add the oranges, yellows, and reds. So we'll start with the mustardy orange color and drop that in. And I'm keeping it flat because I want to try not to let the orange go into where the sun's going to be. Whoops, I got a little too close there, but that's okay. I can just brush it off. Rinse, touch, and I'm going to go back and just wipe that away. and this is creeping into the center, so I'm going to wipe that away too. So this is, notice I'm wiping my drips, but that's because I actually want the color to disappear in this case. Then we're going to go into the bright red, the bottom edge of the sky. Dab that in. And this color is much more dense. It's that soupy kind of consistency, so it doesn't spread as well as the ones that are waterier. Is that a word? Watery. More watery. Then I'm going to go in and add the yellow in the middle. Rinse, touch, and sort of encourage the colors to blend with just a clean, damp brush, touching my towel every so often so that I get the excess paint and water off. And there we go. So, which one do we like better? I think I'm more of a fan of this one, actually. So that's where we put the peach and the warm colors on first, the oranges, yellows, and reds, and the blue on last. So I think that's what we're going to do for this. I'm happier with that result. This one got a little too mixed up in the sky there. So hopefully after that test, you feel more comfortable doing your own sky, and you can pick whichever way worked better for you. Maybe you liked the other sample better, so you're welcome to do it that way. I'm just going to tape this back on. Okay, so let's see. We'll start with the water again. If you don't have clean water, you can go get some. Mine is just a little bit tinted yellow, but it's so light, and the sky is going to be pretty vibrant that it's not going to make much difference, so I'm not going to change my water. But if you have a kind of blue water or something, you'll want to change it. So just use your large brush, get a nice big brush full of water, and wet your sky. Also, don't worry if the paper buckles. It probably should buckle because it's getting wet, and that's what paper does when it gets wet. And it may stay a little bit buckled after you blow dry, but it will subside at least. And that's just kind of the nature of what we're doing here. Also, try when you get down to the horizon line to not go below the horizon line. Try to keep that edge really straight, even though it's just water, because anywhere you put water, the color will want to bleed. So you don't want to let it bleed below the horizon if possible. Now we're actually going to use our large brush for this because we want the color to go on really spread out. And the small brush will probably leave pencil lines. I'm going to stir that up. It looks like it dried a little bit. So we're going to start with, excuse me, the peach, and just put that in at the top and let it fall. And already my water is starting to dry. It is a very hot day here. The hotter the weather, the quicker your paint and your water dries, and the more challenging this can be. So hopefully you're doing this in snow or somewhere not in the 90s or hundreds. So let's see, I'm going to go a little bit further with that. And the water is starting to really pool up on the corners here, the color is. So I'm going to lift my board, also because I just don't want this paint to go any further. I'm going to brush that in and soak these up. It's totally fine for the paint to go off the side of the page. That's just your scratch paper. But I don't want it to go any further. Now I'm going to switch to my round brush because I'm doing a smaller area. Switch to my orange color and drop that in along the sides here. I went over the top in the last sample, and the first one I didn't. Doesn't really matter. I guess I'm going to go over the top because the paint doesn't appear to be falling down too quickly, so I don't think it's going to go into this yellow area. Just going to add a little more up here. I really like the way it's bleeding over there. And then rinse, touch, get the red, put that in at the bottom and let it bleed into the orange. And over here. Rinse, touch, and I'm again kind of getting large drips pooling up, so I'm going to touch those just to make sure they don't get pesky and go somewhere I don't want them to go. And I'm going to soak up this. I did get a little bit below the horizon line over here, but that's also okay. We can fix that later. And then I'm going to get my yellow. This is going to be exciting, and put that in the middle here. Try to keep it really straight against the horizon line, and then just fill in. Then I'm going to rinse, touch my towel, and go back and just dab at the edge where it's not naturally bleeding together. But you see what's happening is I'm kind of pulling a little color off when I do that. Paint's starting to dry, so I'm going to put a little more color in and then leave it alone. All right. And I'm looking at the reference photo and feel like the red could be a little bit brighter. I'm almost out of red here, but I'm going to take a chance and see if I can get it a little brighter along the bottom edge of the horizon by dabbing it. I'm only doing this because my paint's still wet down there, so I think I can. Yep, and that'll be good. I have a little bit of a line between the orange and pink here, but I know I'm going to go back over this with a coat of water, which is going to help to loosen that up, so I'm not going to try to mess with it. The other reason is if I try to mess with it, I'll probably leave a little bit of a ghost line there, so I don't want to do that. Now I'm just looking around at it from an angle to see if I see any major drips, and I don't, but the whole thing is very wet. So I'm going to put it flat, oops, so that I don't let the drips go anymore, and we're going to blow dry. So again, angling your blow dryer away from your painting, turn it on low, and then hold it at least 12 inches away.